Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out wintry Michigan day. Appreciate you being here. Looking forward to a great night of a documentary film called The Recorder and about Marion Stokes, as well as a great panel discussion afterwards. My name's Andy Weibel, and I teach philosophy here at Muskegon Community College and also help run the Muskegon Community College Lecture Series, and of which this event is a part of. It is also, we have several co-sponsors tonight. So not just the lecture series, but the Muskegon Area District Library, the Muskegon Young Black Professionals, and the Muskegon Community College Center for Experiential Learning are all part of tonight's event. So thank you for all of that. And this is one of many events being promoted as part of Black History Month here at Muskegon Community College. I think we have 3 events next week, so check our calendar. There's lots of great things for you to come to, and please take advantage of them. The plan for tonight is to watch part of the documentary Recorder, so we're going to watch the first part and the second part. And so there'll be a slight gap, but it's not enough to go smoke a cigarette or go to the bathroom. It's like 30 seconds. So hang in there, and we'll have that little tiny break. But then after the film, we will go then to the panel discussion. And we're going to try to get you out of here by 8 o'clock. I'm sure the time will go fast. I've put out cards for you, and the discussion will be moderated by Ron Suzak, and he's from the Muskegon District Library. And I will be running around with this microphone. And also, I hope you got a card, an index card. If not, I can get you one. And you can write your question on there, or feel free to flag me down and use this mic, but keep them brief, all right? So again, thank you for being here, and I got another Jocelyn Hines from the Muskegon Young Black Professionals would like to welcome you all as well.
All righty. Good evening, everyone. I am Jocelyn Hines, and I serve as the founder and board chair of Muskegon Young Black Professionals. So we're an organization that has been in Muskegon County since 2017. We provide social and professional development opportunities for Black professionals here in Muskegon County. We're extremely grateful and humbled to host events like this. We think the topic matter is really important and relevant to all of our community members. So we're happy to be here. We were also happy to provide the refreshments today. So if you want to learn more about our organization, you can come and see me, or you can follow us on Facebook at Muskegon Young Black Professionals, and we also have a website, muskegonybp.org. So we would love for you all to be involved, and look forward to hosting more events like this and other events throughout the year. So thank you all, and welcome to this event.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And with that, we'll start the documentary Recorder. Thanks a lot.
A gay man was shot to death.
Only 72 seconds following liftoff, the tragic explosion. Challenger was engulfed in flames.
I think I'll introduce them, have them come up, and we'll get going. And again, if you need a card, I got more for questions, and I'll be running around as well. But first off, we've got Jon Covington as part of our panel. Come on up, Jon. Jon is the president and CEO of Jon Covington Group, is a Midwest West Michigan native who's traveled the world while working in radio, television, and film. Under the umbrella of the Jon Covington Group, Jon has worked on or created a myriad of campaigns, projects of various companies, including BET, Television Network, Gatorade, and I Participate campaigns spearheaded by Michelle Obama. He's interviewed the likes of Chris Brown, Motown founder Berry Gordy, Fantasia, Sierra, Gladys Knight, Al Sharpton, and a host of others. Please help me welcome Jon Covington. Thank you, Jon. We also have Dave Alexander. Hey, come on down, Dave. Dave was a journalist with the Muskegon Chronicle for well over 30 years, covering local politics and community affairs. He then became the executive director of Muskegon Downtown Now for 3 years, and then became the downtown development manager for downtown Muskegon for 5 years. For the past 40 years, if it happened in Muskegon, Dave either wrote about it or helped develop it. Please help me welcome Dave Alexander. And next up, and our final panelist coming to us via the World Wide Web is Sid Simone, MBA, is a radio, TV personality, entrepreneur, professor, and author with 21 years in broadcasting. Sid has developed, hosted, and produced more than 10 original radio and television programs for the likes of CBS and Citadel Broadcasting. Using her media platform, she has helped suicide victims, runaway teens, and small businesses. As the founder, CEO of Sid Simone Incorporated, a staffing and business consulting agency since 2012, Sid's company is the only African-American women-owned promotional staffing and training agency in the United States. Featured in over 30 national publications, Sid's accolades include being ranked one of the U.S.'s top 20 millennials in staffing and a feature of Inc. Incorporated magazine for her business acumen. Please help me welcome Sid Simone. And of course, starting us off with leading this fine panel discussion is, come on up, as we said, Ron.
Thank you. Well, I think I have the easiest job tonight. I just have to ask the questions. So we'll get rolling here in a quick second. As Andy mentioned, after the panel, we will have open up to the floor for questions. And those who are participating online, if you want to submit a question using the Q&A button on the platform, certainly feel free to do that. So if you're ready.
We're ready.
Sometime in 1979, Marion Stokes becomes obsessed with finding the truth within the noise of a changing media environment. For the next 33 years, she recorded all of it, capturing what is believed to be the only lasting copy of how the industry covered everything from Oklahoma City to Columbine to 9/11. The social value of Stokes' archive is essentially priceless, more so to the generation that didn't experience those events in real time. 50 years from now, what will the Stokes archive say about the culture that was captured as sound bites and breaking news?
"50 years from now." After they view the material and wonder what in the world was that I just saw, I think for some curious people, like I was when I was much younger, well, still am as an old guy, I think they'll say that it's fascinating. And I could go on and on from that, but I think they would say, wow, this is fascinating. Even looking at it 30 years later, I'm sitting there saying, this is fascinating. And while I was obviously alive, that's not what I meant to say. I was alive 30 years ago, but obviously I experienced some of those things. Just to give you an example, I worked for an airline at the time 9/11 happened, and I had been on one of the flights that went into the tower, because oftentimes airlines have the same flight number and the same route, right? And so not only did I witness part of what happened, but I felt like I was pretty connected to it. And even though I was that close to it, sitting there watching it, I'm just thinking, man, it's almost like I wasn't there, because it's been so long ago now. And I think, so 50 years from now, that's going to be probably times 100, the feeling that I felt sitting there.
Good point. Anything else, Dave?
What we saw there was the newsreel, and let me use a long-held term, maybe of my parents' generation, the newsreel of my professional life. I became a journalist in this town in '81, and my last professional gig here with the M Live and the Chronicle was in 2015. So all of that I lived on here on a local level. And you mentioned 9/11, John. I covered the closing of the Muskegon airport. I remember being out there on the day of 9/11 at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was nothing in the sky except the military aircraft, and all the commercial and the private aircraft was on the ground, and I sat around the pilot's lounge wondering what in the heck just happened. So yeah, there's a lot of memories coming back there. I think it's a great reflection of what we lived. Those of us that went through those years and those decades. And I would point to 9/11 and the technological changes that we had maybe as the most significant. 9/11, very much a dramatic, immediate effect on our lives, those of us who lived through that era. The technological changes was sort of like a slow drip, but it was a slow movement and more subtle changes, but probably more lasting impact. So those two really come to my mind. I would say 50 years from now, the historians are going to have to decide whether our generation did good or not. We did a lot of good things, but I would question whether the historians would say we left this country, this world, in that great of a situation that we have today going forward. I don't think our generation's done the greatest of work.
Just to follow up on that, one thing that Marion Stokes really seemed to believe in is that people make decisions based on information. Do you think there'll be some sense of salvation from somebody looking 50 years, 100 years down the road, that the folks who made decisions in real time made them on the information that the media provided to them? And if you look at all the influence and all the different perspectives that were shared, that people took what they got and made the best choices? No, Sid wants to jump in on that. Go ahead. We can start there.
So I will answer your first question. And then also, I'm sorry, your second question is, do I feel like people have made a good decision based off of the news that they have received? Was that your second question?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay. So one, unfortunately, I would love to say that 50 years from now, people will actually care about these archives. But from what I have seen as a professor in dealing with our generation, and then this new generation that's coming up, the generation of Alpha, I don't think they're going to care, because right now they don't care about current news, and they lack the interest in what happened in 2012 and what happened in 2001. So 50 years from now, I don't see these generations really caring and preserving content and news and valuing it the way that we do now. So some of us have to be historians. We have to have a passion and an enthusiasm for knowing what happened in the past and being able to carry it on and show future generations. I just don't think that generation has that, and we're not going to see that 50 years from now, unfortunately. And then to tell you about people's perception of and what happens in the newsroom. So unfortunately, what happens in the newsroom a lot of times is, yes, it's clickbait. And we have to cover stories that we know people are going to like online. So it's not just a matter of telling stories that you're going to watch on TV, but now the stories that we cover are how many people are going to like it, how many people are going to click on it, and then we have somebody in the newsroom that's looking at that data several times per day to see how many people have clicked on the article. And if not enough people have clicked on the article and we haven't reached that threshold, then we have to change the title. And then we have to move it around on the website. And then it has to be placed in a different platform. So yes, what we cover in the newsroom is based off of how many people are going to like, share, and follow, and how many new followers can the station get from that story.
Anything else to add? We're going to move on to the next question. The next question does hit upon something that Sid just recently mentioned in terms of this generation and where they get their news. A recent Pew Research poll found that 54% of those surveyed received their news via social media platforms. These platforms, such as Meta, X, TikTok, have by and large removed themselves from playing the role of editor, leaving the job of determining fact from fiction entirely to the consumer. What is both the impact of this and also what are the risks?
Well, I think the impact is huge, and in some cases, the impact of it has been devastating. And I think, as Sid said, so it's up to us to make sure we do our part to share. And so if that means you're calling one of us a historian, which Dave and I have been doing this together for decades, literally. Yeah, a couple. So if that means that we're the historian or we're the truth bearer, then so be it. I've taken it upon myself multiple times to reach out to somebody who I think is interested in the truth and inboxed or shot a message and said, you know what you shared, it's not true. And this is why. And in some cases, people go, wow, I had no idea. And then in some cases, people didn't care. Some people aren't interested in the truth. But the difference is that we have this modern era of technology. There's always been everything that currently exists. So you've always had people who weren't interested in the truth. You've always had people who are interested in the truth. It's just, to your point, we've got this thing called social media that no longer wants to regulate what's fact from fiction. So I think that it has been devastating. It will be devastating. But I also think that the impact of it, which I feel personally we've seen, but the good thing about the impact is that if you're in a car and you get hit by somebody or there's an accident, that's it. That's the impact, right? Mm-hmm. And so the impact often, while it hits hard, once it's over, it's over.
My view would be on the subject, I guess, is that we've lost the professional gatekeepers of what would be called information or news. Some feel that's a great thing. It's freeing, it's opening up, it's democratization of these platforms, and everyone can have at it. But then others would point out that there really isn't a coherent narrative that we have today of our community, of our state, our nation, or the world. And there's a chaos in the communication channels that are out there that is because you really don't have to be that smart. You really don't have to be that informed or really have that great a perspective to share, and you're out there with everybody else. And there are obviously platforms and ways that people rise to the top and or get heard, and others don't. We have plenty of information, unprecedented sources of it, but I don't think it's being presented in a way that makes us intellectually understanding our world any better.
What about you, Sid?
I think so. Dave used the right word of chaos. There's so much content that we are being bombarded with on a daily basis. And when you travel internationally as well, like in different Asian countries, you go into a grocery store and you're going to hear like 10 different types of music. And then there is an advertisement on every other aisle. And when I talk about chaos, when you just go into a grocery store, it's like, it's overwhelming. And I feel like that's how we are in the States as well, where there's just so much content that we're not quite sure what to choose. And I think that subconsciously certain people choose to go with what's easier. And a lot of content makes people desensitized. Look at how fast and convenient and and the fact that a lot of people are interested in virtual reality. Ask yourself, why is it that so many people are playing video games and so enthralled with virtual reality? Why not live in reality instead of virtual reality? What are you trying to escape when you're creating a facade of life? And so you have these video games, as an example, that have desensitized our students and have desensitized people, where now violence is considered acceptable. And so when you see it in real life, it no longer phases you because you see it on TV, you watch it in movies, you watch The Purge, you're playing Grand Theft Auto, and all of a sudden real life happens and you're not responding to it because you're like, oh, I saw that already. So I think it's a risk of all of this living life as a facade. It's going to be interesting because I see so much of a lot of people in pain in reality, but because they're desensitized to it, because they're dealing with fake people that they can control on a video game, or life that they can control. That's the risk of all of this different content and the chaos that Dave mentioned.
I think you just mentioned something really fascinating, Sid, and that's the idea of choice in terms of our consumption of content and media. We're home looking for something on television. We flip through 43 channels and spend an hour and a half trying to find something to watch for a half hour. Has news too become that sense of content? Is news in essence now a form of entertainment? And if it is, what is the impact on the consumer?
I think in some cases it has, and in some cases not. And so the world is made up of all kinds, right? The world is made up of people who are totally all about the green dollar. And so the decisions they make with their products, whether it be television, radio, I guess there's not much of a thing called print anymore.
Not much of it.
Yeah, but some people, it's all about the dollar. And then for some people, it's all about integrity, and it's all about what's true and honesty. And so you have that in various forms of news as well. The impact of it is what I mentioned earlier in one of your earlier questions. I think that the impact of that is, in some cases, it's devastating, because people, once upon a time, that's who they trusted, was the news. And if the news said it, or if Ted Koppel, or was it Brian Donaldson and others that we saw during the Marion Stokes film, if they said it, you could take it to the bank.
It was the truth.
It was the truth. When I was a kid, there were 3 channels. There was NBC, there was ABC, there was CBS, and that's where you got your news, or AM radio. And then along came this fourth network called Fox. And so what a lot of people don't really think about, when I think about my colleague Demetrius, who is sitting in the audience, or I think about the very young Ken James, who's sitting in the audience. Some people don't even think about the fact that all the other channels are cable. So all the other stuff is cable. You've only got a few networks. Everything else is cable. And with cable, it's like there just were no rules, really.
The 24/7 news cycle, the content is information, is news, however you want to define that. But to get us to continue to come back or stay with them through that cycle, it's presented in ways that is entertainment. It's marketed as entertainment to keep the eyeballs on it. And I think what we have seen in our society is that has preyed upon those who are lonely, those who are isolated, those who are fearful for whatever it is out there that they fear. And it creates conditions where watching the news, something that I think is healthy, becomes obsessive and unhealthy. Conflict attracts. I mean, it's what drives us as one of the major news values that news editors and reporters in my day decided as to what is news and what isn't. Negativity sells, not positivity. And this all, I think, feeds our need for the dramatic. And that may titillate, but it doesn't always inform.
I like that. It may titillate, but maybe not educate. Sid, anything
How do you
else?
spell that?
Don't ask me
Titillate.
do not ask me to spell anything.
Oh, infotainment is the best way to put this because people do not want just information and they don't want just entertainment. They want infotainment. So it is a hybrid of content. And yes, this desire and this ravenous audience that we have for infotainment has influenced how I have created talk shows in order to cover news. And that's why if you look on TV now, you see a lot of different talk shows, but they're trying to cover news, but in an interesting way. So they may sit down with someone that has a very serious topic to cover, but they have to incorporate jokes. They have to have maybe a comedian there as the comic relief. Because that's the entertainment portion, but they still have to cover like the domestic violence, or they have to cover something that happened to deal with racism, or there was a crisis of some sort. So infotainment, I feel like, is the best way to describe a lot of the content that you see. And then also it gives this fact versus fiction to keep in tandem with what we're talking about, the fact and fiction. If you look at how stories are covered, previously news was neutral. And so you watch the news to get a neutral perspective. You watch to hear the facts, not to hear someone's opinion. And so if you've looked in like the last 20 years, we see more talk shows, we see more infotainment shows where it's more of like The View and The Talk and some other shows where it's a roundtable discussion. And yes, there's the base is going to be the fact of information, but people are giving their opinions about it versus if you watch the news, it's supposed to be neutral. So that definitely influences how as the media, we cover news, but then also it influences a lot of us as an audience of watching content.
I want to just say something real quick. There was a very popular personality on one of the networks, and that personality was sued. And so the network for lying, okay? And some families were involved, and they filed this big lawsuit. And anyway, so the network's defense in court was that particular person doesn't do the news, and anybody who believes them that is what they do essentially is crazy. That was their defense. They won. The person who filed the lawsuit lost, and they won because of that defense. Very popular personality, millions of followers, and people believed what that person said. They if he said you can go to the bank and get $100 out and tell them I sent you, millions of people would have gone to the bank and said, this particular person said that I could come here and get $100. So yes, infotainment.
John, I've gone through this personally as well with a. I was saying that I've gone through this personally with a media company where I was covering the news, and that was my job. I was the host and the anchor, and we had a conflict behind closed doors. Well, it wasn't so much behind closed doors, but we had this conflict because they felt like I didn't say what this person did was right or wrong, and it was covering a story about guns. And I'm thinking, well, my job is not to say what this person did was right or wrong. My job was to tell the audience what occurred, not my opinion on this person's behavior and their action. And so I had to ask the question, well, is that now our job as news anchors? Are we supposed to be giving our opinions, or are we supposed to be giving the information? I thought the news was supposed to be neutral. And kind of to your point, John, you mentioned, like, if we look at the show The Breakfast Club started off as like a gossip show, like a gossip podcast, and now it's considered one of the most influential news stories. Especially, it used to be considered just urban news, but now they have politicians and everyone on there, and it's considered the most influential news source now.
Fascinating times we live in. Sadly, we're down to our last question. So think about this. Neil deGrasse Tyson once said, there are personal truths, objective truths, and political truths. I get the sense that Marion Stokes would have a strong response to this idea of multiple truth. Your thoughts on the influence on truth on today's media? Is it part of the process, or is it part of the job of the consumer to create the sensation of truth?
Well, yeah, you're pointing at me at that one, aren't you? Truth is a tricky thing these days, isn't it? Personal truth, I would say, is something that I hold from my experiences, my perceptions of what I experienced, and the biases I hold based on that. Objective truth or factual truth, I used to get, if you got a mistake back at Central Michigan University in Reporting 101, if there is a factual error in it, you blew the whole assignment. You couldn't have that. But what is objective truth? Something can be proven. Mm-hmm. We're in the theater here, and we can name the address and the place and the time and the date. Direct observation. Or it can be scientifically reasoned that something is true, if we can believe in science, and not all the time does that bring us to what is truth. But for the most part, there's a consensus on that. The political truth, as someone who covered politics in this town for years and years, is a whole different thing, in which it comes from argumentation. And we see that on a national scale in terms of when we're looking at things that are true from a political standpoint. It comes from a political party or philosophy of government or of the worldview. It can lead into propaganda. It's another way of I think, looking at it. Put on top of that the great number of digital outlets, the social media outlets, and political truth, again, Sid, creates that communications chaos that we're now living in.
I think truth should be a part of the process. So, it was either that or truth, job of the consumer to create. Mm-hmm. So if I'm sitting here and I say, or tomorrow, I say, I'm on TV and I say, last night I was at Muskegon Community College and we had an amazing time. I was wearing black glasses. and there were people in front of me that had on a black hoodie and a gray hoodie with dark hair and lighter hair. That would be the truth. Correct?
Factual.
Factual, yes.
Yeah. And so if I'm sharing, it should be a part of the process for me to share what the truth is versus relying or expecting someone to create what the truth is. I know what the truth is, and I'm responsible for sharing it if I have a platform where I can share it. That's whether it's social media, that's whether it's sitting here on this stage with my lifelong friend, or whether I'm in Los Angeles where I'm currently working. It's my responsibility if I have the platform.
I'll chime in on this one and say that people may not remember what you say, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And that's a quote that I always remind my students when they're communicating with people. So when we talk about personal truths, personal truth is how someone felt about a situation. It's not necessarily what you did or what you said, but it's literally how did you make them feel? How did I feel when you looked at me? How did I feel when you said that to me? How do I feel about that person because they wore that outfit? Not necessarily that they did something or said something to you to make you feel that emotion, but that's your personal truth. That's how you felt. Objective truth is what's recorded. Thanks to Marion Stokes. It's what was the reality. It's a neutral, unobjected reality. And then political truth is what others want to be true. That's how I feel about Mr. Tyson's quote. It's pretty much emotion versus what people want versus what actually occurs.
What other people want to be the truth. I like that quote. This is probably a good point to turn it over to the audience if there are.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you, Ron, and
Thank
the
you.
panel. And thank you. That was great conversation. We want to keep it going. I'll be around. Raise your hand, or I'll collect your cards. If you got cards, I'd be happy to bring them to you. But I see a hand, and then I'll get the cards while they're answered.
While he's doing that, Demetrius, could you look up Barclay and Rittenhouse Square in Philly? I used to run by that place. I lived in Philly for a while. I'm curious what a unit runs for in the building Marion Stokes lives in.
I'm sure it's a lot of money.
And we hear that's one of 9 places that she had.
Right.
Oh, what you didn't see, because they condensed the film, which is a fascinating film, I recommend it, was that you wonder, well, where did she get all this money from? Well, she married a guy who was well-to-do, but she was an early investor in Apple. And so she she kind of guided the whole stock thing in the family. And so Apple was one of those, and she had I don't know how many Apple computers.
Early
Yeah.
adopter, obviously, of
Yeah.
the Apple technology.
Yeah.
And John was
The colorful ones.
John was a developer, and I think her second
Yep.
husband obviously had a foundation of
Yep.
wealth that kept
Yep.
this obsession of hers going forward.
Well, that's true. And I do hope everyone gets to see the entire film. It's out there and available. But here's our question.
All right, I have a question not only for the panel, but for anybody else in the audience that maybe might want to speak up for this. No offense to anybody in the audience. Do you think that our older generation has been blinded by the introduction or discovery of the internet or current events? And do you think that has lost or forgotten the history that they have lived through and experienced due to the introduction of social media and these events?
I guess
What-
only old people can answer that. That's me and you.
We'll let you take the first shot at that one.
I don't know if we've forgotten. I lived through an era called crack cocaine. And in my neighborhood where I grew up, a lot of people succumbed to crack, whether they ended up in prison or they ended up dead. Lots of people around me. Grew up on Spring and Allen. I grew up here. And it's something that I often look back on. It's something that I talk about, and the people that work with me, and when I travel, I talk about it. I don't know that social media has caused us to forget, but I think social media in some ways has clouded some of what we've experienced. Not forget, social media, in my opinion, is like the best invention ever, and it's also the worst invention ever.
Marx, right? Opiate of the masses, religion. Is it social media today? And what is catching the outcomes of all of our usage of social media? And that's a corporate structure that is making billions and billions of dollars and collecting data, which is it's hugely valuable. I guess I think of it in those terms. I'm not sure what I think in terms of what the internet has done, except I worked in this town when I was reporting and we didn't have the internet. We went to a place called Hackley Library to go down and get some information. So.
Great question.
I've got some from the cards here. One here is, do you think that media illiteracy and the rise of virtual reality, as was mentioned earlier, increases the bystander effect in violent situations?
Sid's still with us. You want to?
Maybe Sid?
Does it increase? I'm sorry, I didn't hear what he said.
Repeat that.
Yes.
All right. Do you think media illiteracy and the rise of virtual reality increases the bystander effect in violent situations?
The bystander effect?
Yes.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. That's why I mentioned that earlier. Too many people are desensitized by reality, and especially in major cities. So I've lived in a lot of major cities, and there's a lot of chaos that occurs, and it just baffles me. Coming from Muskegon, where previously, you all recall, when we used to have a shooting, 20 years ago, it made, state headlines. Now we're desensitized to it, so it just happens so regularly and so often. And then when I go to a major city where they see people overdose, like you go to a Philly, and when I lived in Philly, I was walking over bodies all of the time because nobody cared. Nobody was programmed to care. And so yes, when you have video games like Grand Theft Auto where you were stealing cars, you're shooting people, there's prostitution, like it desensitizes people to reality. And my concern as a professor and dealing with students that are between the ages of 16 and 22, and I see these students be desensitized and they don't have any emotion toward their peers in class. It concerns me that these are the people that are making decisions. These are the people that are voting. These are the people that are driving. I just watched a video right before we gathered tonight, and I watched this person just erratically drive through people's houses, and for no reason, just because they felt like it. I'm just like, you're not in a video game. So yes, the bystander effect of like, we just don't care anymore, unfortunately. There's no empathy and sympathy for people's lives and their livelihood.
I want to add to that the reasons that the person who asked the question pertain to some very key things, and one of them was illiteracy.
Mm.
Yeah, media literacy.
Not knowing what's fact or fiction when it comes to media literacy. Is that
Yeah, I think so, right. That's
because
the way I would
media,
understand it, yeah.
because we could actually take that into a couple of different areas. Media illiteracy means that you're not sure which source is credible. So not just the source, but also the information, because you can have a credible source, but have information that's not fact, and then vice versa.
And it also means that you lack the comprehension to determine what is and what isn't. It's just like functional illiteracy as it relates to reading and writing and you look at, not to go too far off, but when you look at the statistics of prison inmates and kids who are part of the juvenile delinquency system, there's a common thread through there, and that's functional illiteracy. And so I would say that media literacy in some ways mirrors functional illiteracy. You can function, but you have a hard time comprehending. And so therefore you can't determine what you need to determine to make healthy, sound decisions.
It comes to my thought that media literacy, taking a look at even the most sophisticated can be tricked or manipulated. Something is wrong. Something is not factual. Something is objectively missing. It's misinformation. But what's sort of scary is that people purposefully are putting out disinformation in which to manipulate for whatever personal or corporate or business reasons, or that they would do this, can make a great effect on our communities, our state, our country. And so misinformation is sometimes easy to pick out, sometimes not. Disinformation, I think, becomes a scary thing because if it's done well, it can change hearts and minds, and for not always the good reason.
As somebody who's worked in information for a long time in the industry, I think believed at one point that it was the generation that came before the internet that was most ripe for the misinformation and the disinformation campaign. Now, hearing from Sid tonight, I do wonder, our current generation, the generation who are students at MCC, who are getting news primarily from TikTok, from X, and from Meta, has that generation learned the lessons of the previous generation, or are they too as susceptible and as ripe to be disenfranchised by disinformation and misinformation? Is it a generational thing?
My students would rather go to Google than to listen to me. And when I'm giving out information in the classroom and I'm telling them something, then they would rather search it on a chat GBT or some random website that they have deemed credible versus hearing what I have to say from industry experience, or me doing this for 21 years, or anything that any lessons that I give. They're just searching on the internet, and if they find a source that they deem credible, then that trumps me as the professor. So we're living in a dangerous time, and also that the AI. John mentioned something earlier. John, you mentioned social media as well, that being dangerous. The AI that has emerged is dangerous because you see people being manipulated. You see images and voices being manipulated. So now we don't know what is fact and fiction. So now my students are thinking that this video that they watched of a former president saying something is valid, and it's not, because somebody has manipulated their voice and their image, their likeness, to fit their agenda.
I wonder, in the past, maybe it was okay to be media illiterate because the editors and the fact checkers would filter out the information before it got to the general public. Where now, since it's not filtered, you have to be more media savvy and more literate in order to figure out what's true and what's not. Would that be accurate?
You have to be your own editor. If you really want to know what's going on, you've got to spend a lot of time at it. It's something we don't have a lot of. So that becomes problematic as folks try to discern what's going on in their town to what's going on, down in Florida to California to Europe. And do we have enough time? The information's out there. I think the factual, and if you put enough of these sources together, you'll be able to tell the story, the narrative. You'll get an idea what's going on. But do we have those kind of times to do that?
And I don't think that, again, the world is made up of all kinds. Some people just aren't interested in the facts. They're not interested in the truth. Everybody here probably knows someone. If you know someone, family, whomever, friends, coworkers, if you know somebody who's just not interested in facts, truth, raise your hand. Some people just aren't interested in the truth. And it looks like the majority of us here know someone like that. And I think sometimes we forget that and we just think, well, of course everybody wants to know what's real and what's not. But that ain't so.
Right. Here's the question.
This is a two-part question. So the first half is, do you think that because the news is based on views, in other words, what's broadcasted must be profitable, that it influences more issues than solution? And the second part is, do you also think that this lack of authenticity is a main reason why the public no longer looks to mainstream media outlets for their information?
Oh, that was good. That's good. That's really good. Who wants to go first? Yes and yes. Give me the first part again real quick. The first part. But yeah, absolutely on the second part.
So the first part, it outlines that the media has a monetary bias based on the viewers, as this young lady, I'm so sorry, I'm bad with names, Sid, explained when she was talking about clickbait. And so because of this monetary bias, when we're looking for viewers to make it profitable to deliver the news, does that influence more issues than solutions?
I think yes and yes. But I also think that just like there are people who are committed to, what is it called when you've got people that do the work that in the communities on the ground, what do we call it? Grassroots, thank you. You're gonna always though have people who are doing the work in every community, grassroots organizations, grassroots media outlets. So yes and yes, but there's always hope. And I believe that in most communities where you really have things happening or people making a difference, they're often the people on the ground. They're often the grassroots people who create systems, sometimes known systems and sometimes it's underground. But yes and yes to the point, but there's always hope because there's always those people in the community on the ground who are really doing the work so that that doesn't happen in totality.
The young lady that just asked this question, I'm glad she asked this because these two updates that's happening currently in broadcasting in the love. So two new things have happened in the last year. So one, a lot of major networks, your ABC, CBS, and Fox, many of them have transitioned away from live video. Statistics have told us that people are no longer interested in the live fire. They're no longer interested in the live car chase. They're no longer interested in what's happening live. And so with that shift, they have decided that they're going to send reporters out to film the content, and then that package will air throughout the day instead of it being live. So if there's a fire, if there's a shooting of some sort that occurred, they're no longer sending the same amount of reporters out to cover that story live. They're not interrupting the 6 p.m. news to cover it. They're just going out, filming it and saying, okay, well, we'll talk about it throughout the day or throughout the night. So that's one shift that has occurred in broadcasting. The second thing that has occurred as well is that some of the shows, some of the content that you see in your morning shows, where you'll have someone that comes on and they'll talk about their product that's supposed to help your skin, or a product that you can use to make your smoothie, whatever that may be. Now, more companies are charging those brands. So it turns into an infomercial. There's no authenticity to it anymore. And so I hosted a show like this. I hosted a daily talk show. I was the host and the producer. And we weren't charging any of the people on the show. Sometimes I would have 1 to 5 different people and we were not charging them. And that has shifted in the last year, where now people are paying to showcase their product versus it being natural.
To your point, I sell a face cream. I'm wearing it now. No, I'm just kidding.
You look great.
Yeah, it works well. I have a couple of cards have asked about local news and local media and how that has changed over time, and what we don't have a local newspaper like we used to. How has local news changed, and how can we get local news since that change has occurred?
People ask me, don't you miss working at the newspaper? And I say, how can you miss what's not there? And Muskegon is not unique in this situation. Across the United States, we have lost local media outlets, be it in broadcast or in print. And what I believe we're really missing with that is the watchdog aspect of it. It has come up from the grassroots that there are watchdogs that are out looking at our governments, looking at our school districts, looking and making sure that people are doing the right thing and are doing it for the good of all. So that's there, but many of the watchdogs bring in their own biases, their own agendas, and are furthering something other than what is good for all. So that is something that's really missing. And it's not coming back anytime soon. I am Muskegon Rotarian, and going into the presidency next year, one of the things that we'll explore is whether we can be a facilitator as a club of bringing a more robust local news coverage to Muskegon. So I'm not sure where that is at, where it's at, but it will be online if it were to come. So local, and I will leave you with this, communities, municipalities, my former employer, City of Muskegon, has Connect Muskegon, and it is a primary source of information project to project that the City of Muskegon is working on. And it's online, it's on the city's website, and you can see the primary documents and then the interpretation of those documents by the engagement team over at the city. That used to be something I did as a reporter. I think it's a little better if it would be outside of the walls of City Hall. It may have a little more credibility, but they are at least doing that. And they are then pointing people to this information and trying to engage them with it so that the policymakers, the elected officials, have some semblance of where the electorate, the citizenry may want to go. So there are new platforms out there that are sort of taking the place of or trying to provide some of the information that WKBZ, The Chronicle, or ZZM, or Wood TV, Wood Radio had. It's definitely fraught with a lot of inconsistencies and issues. I'm not sure where we're going, but we do need to replace that some way, somehow. And each community is doing it in different ways.
I think the most productive communities are and diverse communities, et cetera, who function together, who exist and coexist together, are informed communities. And so when you go to a community that's thriving, oftentimes they've got exactly what it is that you're talking about, and people are informed, and people are excited, and people feel like they are a part of the equation. And so when you're a part of the equation, you can be a part of the solution.
So I have 4 bullet points here. One, if you're looking for credible information, you're looking for news outlets, look on YouTube and subscribe to multiple local news outlets, not just the ones in your area, but look at something that's, so if you're in Muskegon, subscribe to something that's in Chicago, Detroit, other markets, because sometimes you'll see some of the same content, but it's told in a different manner. So that's one thing that I always do. And then I subscribe to worldwide news as well. So literally in other countries, I'll subscribe to those channels so I can watch the news live from other countries. Also in your Google News feeds. So that's how I get my information. In your Google News feed, it will make suggestions for topics. So you can go in there and allow it to suggest topics based off of what you have searched for. And so then the news that you receive will be based off of that. And then also you can go in and add keywords. So a lot of people don't know that they can change those settings for those articles that they receive in their Google News feed. And then looking at your billboards, flyers, going to the library is a great source of credible information. So being proactive versus reactive is key. I know anytime I go to a new city, I always go to the library first. I look at what's happening in the community so I can find out how they're functioning. And then number 2, for credibility, anytime that I read something and there's punctuation that's incorrect, there's misspellings, if they have a past of inaccuracy of information, I'm out. You're no longer credible. That right. Even John, like look at your friends, right? Any of my friends, or not my friends, but associates, or anytime I read a post online and it's in all caps, immediately I'm out. You're not credible.
I'm out.
But what's scary is we don't know where that's coming from. Coming from anywhere over the world or anywhere in our community. You don't know the source of some of this stuff.
To Sid's point, I decided either it was today or yesterday that when I read a post that someone's written and they're just so far out there and they're not able to put a sentence together and there's not a period anywhere or a comma and it's like 8 paragraphs, I'm like, why am I going to bother responding to this? I'm the dummy if I take the time to respond to this kind of foolishness. And so I was like, no more of that. And I think that if we start developing that attitude, because then you realize the way people communicate tells you a lot about them, with all due respect. And
This is key when we look at Google reviews, because a lot of people look at Google reviews to determine if they're going to go to a restaurant or a hotel, right? And so that is, in a sense, a source of news, right? But one thing that I learned from the Better Business Bureau, so owning my business, I've had different trials and tribulations, but the investigator, she told me how she's been doing this for 21 years. She told me that how she can discern between a legitimate complaint and an illegitimate complaint. People lead with feelings. And so very specifically, I had someone complain about my company, and they talked about how disrespected they were and how they felt, and they've been doing this for so long. And throughout that entire 2-page complaint that was in all caps, by the way, not one time did they say that they did the job, because their complaint was that they had worked for my company and that they hadn't been paid. But throughout those 2 pages of all caps, not one time did they say they did the job and that they submitted the receipts and that they deserve to be paid. All they said is, I want to be paid. I want to be paid. And I feel disrespected. And so the investigator told me they knew immediately that this was not a legitimate complaint.
Sure.
So when you see people complain about their feelings and they lead with that, usually when there's no facts, there's no figures, there's no numbers, it's not going to be a fact. It's not going to be a great news story.
We're need to wind down here. I got one more question here that I'll have us do, and then we probably should wind up. Here's our last question.
So a couple of my questions have been answered so far, but I wanted to circle back to artificial intelligence and media illiteracy. That's the first time I've heard media illiteracy, but I'm starting to understand it. So as we know, AI continues to automate jobs, and with this new generation coming up, they rely and put a lot of trust into AI-generated information. In your guys' opinion, what safeguards should be put into place to ensure accountability and accuracy aside from consumer due diligence?
That's a great question. I'm gonna let somebody else answer that one.
It's tricky because AI is developing at such a rapid rate. It's almost gotten ahead of the conversations about how you could even think about trying to regulate it. So for entrepreneurs, people who are developing these platforms, yes, I mean, the energy, the creativity of creating these algorithms, I think it happens. And then later is when you start to have conversations about, well, should you have done that? Right? What are the consequences? What is the impact, the potential impact? It's a hard question because AI, I think, as you've mentioned, sets itself up to really transform society.
AI could have does my job. I mean, what I went to study in the 30 years plus that I was doing, AI can basically do what I used to do. And that's that's a little mind-numbing for a guy my age.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So I think one of those, he brings up a good point, because it's almost impossible to put up those safeguards. It's out of control at this point. And when you have like Mark Zuckerberg, he released a video just in the last couple of weeks saying that they're trying to put things in place to make sure that content is fact, and they put in new regulations and protocols. When it comes to AI, it's almost impossible. Even at different universities I worked with, we have these policies in our syllabi when it comes to plagiarism, but it's hard to enforce. So how can we safeguard?
I think that, just real quickly, I think that everybody familiar with a pendulum, and it goes back and forth, but when you first let it go, it swings kind of erratically, and then it finds its center. And I think that's kind of how AI is. AI right now, it's like radical. It's like that pendulum. It's swinging back and forth. But I think at some point, it's going to find that center. Because right now, there's no such thing as putting any safeguards on it. But I think the longer it's around, I think some of those things are going to change. And even in some of the work that I do, when we've used it, sometimes it comes back as way too much. I think I had this conversation with you, Demetrius. So I work with somebody, and they'll take something I write, and I spend an hour writing it, and then they'll put it in chat, and then come back with like this whole book. And I'm like, nobody's going to read that. But it looks like AI. And so you got to be even careful with AI. You got to be careful with it. You can't just take it as the gospel, use it and then go off and then present to 600 CEOs at a TED Talk. And then you look up and you go, oh, wow, that doesn't quite make sense. That's AI. So you got to be careful with it. But right now, guardrails, no, it's got to find its center like that pendulum. Did you find out Rittenhouse Square where the place goes for? Oh, did you?
Well, I think we better wrap up. Let's thank our panelists. Sid Simone, Dave Alexander, Jon Covington, and Ron Suzak. Thank you so much for being here, folks. One last thing I'd leave you with is Marion Stokes said that she hopes for an open community of trust leading to a peaceful and cooperative society. I think tonight's panel was a step towards that, and I hope we all achieve that in the future. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.